Let me do it right now. Hello, hello, hello. How's everybody doing there on Facebook Live and YouTube Live? So sorry, I forgot to press live when we started this conversation. So if you all don't mind, we'll start all over again. But we just had really great introductions here with our guest Em Piro and Mary Joseph. But doing a quick reset. uh, it's been a while, as you all can see. It's been a while. You all remember me from the Nidakini Daya show, the podcast we started a few years ago through the Amigos de Seattle radio station. I took a brief hiatus, brief pause to really focus internally, focus here on developing my business Growing Contigo. But now I'm excited to be back here with you all to bring some really thoughtful conversations, some really good content for our community, specifically focused around economic development, economic empowerment, and building support systems for our community. And so sorry, Em and Mary Joseph. I know you all just did a wonderful job introducing yourselves, but I just forgot to click the go live button. This is what happens when I go take a hiatus for about a year and forget how this system works.
No, I actually like the opportunity to redo. Thank you.
Yeah, it's working out.
It's
definitely working out.
Quick question. Did it record what we said before, or should we?
It did record. So
okay, cool.
For folks that watch the recording afterwards, if you want to watch it on Facebook or on YouTube, you'll be able to see the whole recording afterwards. So
okay.
We'll do a quick recap.
Yeah, we'll do a mini version of what we did before.
And also want to mention, if folks who are listening live or tuning in live, if you want to interact, if you want to ask questions during this show, feel free to comment either through Facebook or YouTube, and we'll be able to see it here, and we'll be able to interact directly with you all. So we definitely want this to be an interactive as much as possible with our listeners. But yeah, welcome back. And maybe I jumped the what's the term they say? Jump the shark a bit. As you can see, there's a new brand. You might all be familiar with the Nidakini Yasho. You might have seen the old logo. But I'm rebranding. I've now relaunched this channel as the Growing Contigo show. We're going to be doing similar, inviting amazing folks from the community to highlight important stories of work going on in the community, interview folks that are bringing valuable resources, valuable information for our community. And I'm really excited to have two amazing guests today that are going to come and join me in a deep conversation around how do we build sustainable business ecosystems? How do we build systems of support, particularly for our small business community, for our entrepreneurship community? And I have two incredible guests here, Em Piro from Sustainable Seattle and Mary Joseph from Movement Strategies. Let me do a quick introduction about these organizations, and we'll learn a little bit more about what they do. But Em here works for, or is the co-director of Sustainable Seattle, and they work to build a thriving future through initiatives that deliver environmental, economic, and community benefits, to promote equity and build resilience. They envision a thriving, regenerative, sustainable Seattle which centers reciprocity, liberation, and restored abundance. I didn't mess up on reciprocity again. Wait, I did it again. And then Mary Joseph here from Movement Strategy. What they do is they insist on a radical shift in philanthropy that transforms giving practices in support of a culture of equity and diversity. So welcome, Em and Joseph. So why don't we start again with Em, and can you tell us a little bit more about who Sustainable Seattle is and what you all do out here?
Yes, of course. And as always, I think it's important whenever we are gathering, and especially when we're talking about the work of sustainability, to acknowledge and show our appreciation for the ancestral lands of the Duwamish that is present day called Seattle. The Duwamish, still active and still advocating and caretakers and protectors of the land. And I live and am calling in today from the land of the Puyallup. And, our job is to work alongside these tribes and restore the modeling for sustainability that they have shown for this region since time immemorial. So we're not inventing new things. We're returning and trying to do right and undo harms. And a lot of our model with Sustainable Seattle, we exist because the movements are happening in the community. We are made up of all the different wonderful people and organizations and initiatives and ideas that people have for our city, for Seattle. to make it more sustainable, the people who are already doing the work. And Sustainable Seattle is here to help bring all those groups together and provide them support and to be a space for alignment. This vision of sustainability is way too big for any one group to do on its own. And so we believe that we can do it together. And we believe that's even part of sustainability, is to work in collaboration. I'm in a time loop because this is our second time going through this. I'm trying to remember what I said before and what we've said now. It's a good chance to kind of like try to describe things in a new and different way. And the other thing that I think is really important to mention is that we really we work on behalf of the whole region, but we focus on the leadership of frontline and the most impacted communities of climate change, of unsustainability, that is especially communities of color and leaders of color. And our understanding is that these are not just, it's not a future threat of climate change. It's not a future threat of the impacts of unsustainability. It's something that people not only are experiencing, but have experienced already for generations. So there's a lot of knowledge that already exists and expertise from living through these impacts. And so there's a lot of solutions and ideas and passion and commitment and vision and like an imperative, like we have to do this for our own survival. And to do good by our ancestors and by future generations. And so we follow and look to and center that leadership because we believe that will heal and help all of us in our region. So that's a bit about kind of how we're set up and what we're doing.
Yeah, no, it's amazing work you're all doing, and I'm glad I got a chance to connect with you all about 5 years ago to learn more about your work, and really glad you reached out, Em, to start this conversation. And kind of what resulted as a phone call is now we're recording a podcast episode here, right?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, no, thank you all. And if you want to follow and learn more about Sustainable Seattle, you can check out their website below, sustainableseattle.org. But coming up also, we have Mary Joseph from Movement Strategies. Welcome, Mary Joseph. I know we just had a chance to meet each other this week, but really excited to learn more about the work you're all doing down in the Bay Area and throughout the region.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here. So I do compliance. I'm head of compliance over at Movement Strategy Center, which is a fiscal sponsor. We're based out of Oakland, and when we started in 2001, the majority of our work was in Oakland. But since then, we've grown almost pretty much nationally. We have groups all over the country right now. Also, a focus still in the Oakland area. But what we do is we are a fiscal sponsor, which means that we have a lot of smaller, size-wise, they vary from very small to relatively large nonprofit organizations that work under our 501c3 designation. So that means that we are able to provide the financial, the HR, all the kind of business critical services for these organizations so that they can work, do their advocacy work on the ground. So we are BIPOC led organization, and the organizations that we sponsor are also mainly BIPOC led and run. So it's interesting because before, when we were first introducing ourselves, you were talking about how the similarities between a nonprofit and a regular business. And it's true, like a lot of the services that we provide are human resources, like I said, finance, compliance. Those are things that kind of are critical to making sure businesses succeed in the same way in the nonprofit. So we're able to provide services so that the groups can think about and focus on the advocacy work that they do. And the advocacy runs a gamut of youth programming, healthcare initiatives, including birthing centers and issues specific such as HIV/AIDS among women. We also do climate justice and sustainability. So it's a very diverse group of organizations that are all working towards making our society hopefully much better and stronger together. So.
Yeah, incredible work you're all doing, and thank you for joining us today. And yeah, as you said, nonprofits also operate as businesses, right? And that's kind of where Growing Contigo, focusing more on the business side, the economic empowerment, small business support, Sustainable Seattle really kind of being deep into the sustainable work and building a sustainable society in all aspects, right? Nonprofit, business, individuals, environment. So I'm really excited to bring this brain trust together to dive into a really deep conversation about how do we build a sustainable economy? How do we build a sustainable society? But also starting out saying that we don't claim to be quote unquote experts at all of this, right? We're not here to bring all the solutions. We just want to be honest with community and say we're not here to say we have all the answers, but what we want to do is plant the seed. We want to plant a seed to a conversation that we hope can continue out in community, can continue out in the world to think differently, think about how we use traditional systems or use infrastructure or models that have existed before and think of what could be possible. How can we create new systems of support within our community, right? But starting with sustainability and what does it mean to be a sustainable community? So, Em, can you tell us a little bit more about from your point of view, what is a sustainable community and how can we work to achieve that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge question. Sustainability is something that is so broad. And I think that single word means something different to every single person who says it. And they get a different vision in their mind and a different relationship with it from the past. And, or it's a concept maybe they've never heard of before. And they're like, sustain what? Why sustain what? So it's a tough one to answer. I can say what it means for me is we are looking at both kind of how we operate at like a large scale, how we operate at like a mid scale, and how we operate at like a personal scale. And so it means like, do we have a society that's set up in a way that is sustainable, meaning we are not doing harm. We are not doing harm to the land, to our resources, and to one another. We find that anytime there is a harm to people, there's a harm to the environment that goes hand in hand with it. And conversely, anytime the environment is harmed, usually people are harmed as well. So sometimes when we think about something that's unsustainable, we think about things like huge trash landfills and things like that. And usually where there's a lot of trash, there are often like people who had to be underpaid in order to make things that could eventually become waste. And so the harm that happens to the environment is also tied to like harm that's happened to people and happened to communities. You're not being paid good wages. Resources are being pulled out of the earth at a rate that's not sustainable. And then it's turning into trash and like nobody's winning in that situation, And so we think about things like that, like impact on the earth and impact on people. We also think about things like, what does it take for me to sustain my livelihood? So like, what does it take for me to have shelter? What does it take for me to have good health? What does it take for me to have an income where I don't have to worry or I don't have to be in fear? And so we think about like, I sometimes use the word viability, like, are things viable for me? And so that viability is part of the conversation about sustainability. And part of why, how this conversation came up with us together is, there's a lot of sustainability conversation that happens like at the huge scale, like the scale of manufacturing, like the example that I gave earlier. But there's also things that really happen at the neighborhood level. My position is that a really, really strong local economy, like local small business structures, and people having a lot of power and control about what kind of work that they do, especially people who want to work to help their community to see an impact that's really, really local, is a super important part of a sustainable community and a sustainable society. I think that we should not have to feel pressured to go work in an environment where we don't feel respected or we don't feel like we're doing good in the world, where we feel like we're doing harm because we're working for like a big polluting firm or something like that. We should have the option to keep our work very close to home and very local and in benefit of ourselves, our families, and our neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned actually something that really brought me way back to when I first came to this country, that, how do we use different language or different what we call code switching, especially if we come to a new environment, a new society, a new country, and the term sustainability or even green jobs, when I work as an interpreter, as a translator, I often get green jobs, trabajos verdes. What do you mean? Is it like everything is painted green, or is it like gardening? So yeah, it's sometimes, how we use language and how to, but thinking as an immigrant, thinking as a economically displaced immigrant, there's also a lot of environmentally displacement going on that's causing immigration, right? So we can look at all those intersections, but a lot of times, a lot of those traditional practices are what I believe we should be going back to and learning from those traditions. And I'm so glad you started your introduction with that, honoring and recognizing the traditional lands here in the Pacific Northwest. But Mary Joseph, you being in the Bay Area, can you give us some examples, or either directly through your work, or if you're familiar, of how you define sustainability there in your community and what that means to you?
Yeah, I think along the lines with what Em says, it is a really hard thing to define because it could mean a lot of different things. I think in the context of work, and business, it's resiliency, personal and also within the business, right? You want to make sure that you're able to handle all the challenges that come your way, and in a positive way, in a way that doesn't impact you so negatively that you can't continue. And I think it kind of, when you were speaking, it kind of reminded me of the way that people during the pandemic, a lot of people said, you know what, I'm done with this job, because it wasn't sustainable, right? And I think a lot of business owners find, they have to push through challenges that make them question, like, is this the right thing to do? Is this sustainable for me on a personal level? And I think the joy of being able to do their work and make, earn income in the way that they want to, and not have to be forced to go into an organization that doesn't respect them, doesn't pay them, is like a beautiful thing. But I think that's one way I think I can see resiliency as part of, kind of the work we do, is kind of in compliance, is kind of like looking out for problems and trying to find ways to solve them before they become bigger problems or actually like sink the organization.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think you both mentioned something around livability, right? How the workforce, how people, we as individuals kind of interact in what we all know, the US being a capitalist society, capitalist economy, right? How do we learn to survive? And then how do we learn to thrive in this economy, in this world, in this system that we operate, interact in, right? And that's why I decided to launch this company, Growing Contigo, because, I spent 10 years in nonprofit, 5 years in government, but then I realized that our community really, especially immigrants, we're a hustling community. We are entrepreneurs, sometimes not by choice, sometimes by need. And majority of jobs are hired by small businesses. And I think that's really where the need is, or that's really where the opportunities to be creative, be innovative really realize. And that's why I'm excited to be bringing this information, these conversations out to their community, right? So livability, how do we, as individuals, as workers, as even as business owners, how do we take that into consideration and really apply it in the way we do business, right? And existing within this capitalist society, but how can we think of it differently, do it differently than how it's been done over generations, that has been primarily white, male-led, or white, male-dominated, right? So that's really what I'm excited about to bring this to this conversation. How can we flip that on its head and be creative about it? So I'm curious, either of you, do you have any thoughts or ideas on how, or any examples that you've seen out in the community, how that's worked?
Do you have something, Marie?
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I want to disclaim that you've brought up a thought for me. It's not really a direct answer to the question that you just posed, so I hope it doesn't get us too off track. Feel free to rein me back in. But one thing that's coming up for me is that when we talk about kind of these two sides of the ways that we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about like impact on the environment, but also like what Marie, you said about resilience, or like the ability to be resilient, like as like a small business owner or something like that. I see these as very directly tied. And the reason is that often people who want to do, like the organizations I talked about when introducing Sustainable Seattle, like I have a small business or even a larger business, I have an entity, or I myself want to do things that are more sustainable, that are benefiting the environment. We find that often these are folks who are trying to work in a new way. They're trying to work out of the traditional system of capitalism or out of the traditional industries that exist. And they're trying to kind of pave a new space and a new way of doing things, but the infrastructure is not there to support them. And so to me, one of the really persistent things, and part of what drew me to this conversation today, that I see over and over and over, is very clear vision, very brilliant ideas, people who are kind of holding these solutions, who have a lot of commitment to them, but who cannot commit to it the way that they need to because they don't have the money, they don't have the stability, and they have important things that they need to consider, like the support of their families and things like that. And they can't just be out here like being so risky. Like they have to be responsible for their livelihoods and for their homes and for other people. And what kind of, like, how would our landscape and world look different if all of those visionary people had the support that they needed and deserved to be able to carry out the visions that they have on behalf of their communities? And of course, we see this very disproportionately in frontline and impacted communities, communities of color, immigrant communities. And that I see very much as like the kind of status quo, the system as it is, the unsustainable aspects of our system reinforcing themselves and kind of making it not viable for people to change that system. Systems like to stay the way that they are. And so what I'm really interested in is how do we, what things that can we do to make people who have these visionary ideas to make their work more resilient, to help it be more viable? If you go and work for like a large corporation, there's all kinds of safety nets that will protect you and catch you. As soon as you go out on your own, you kind of sacrifice and lose all of those. But what I'm wondering is, are there ways that we can kind of band together to make up that gap and to be able to provide those things for people, to make it less of a risk to do work that benefits you, benefits your community, and aligns with your values?
Yeah, and I know you and I were chatting about some of those ideas, what that could work. But also, Mary Joseph, I know the work you're all doing with providing fiscal sponsorship. That's one model, right, where different individuals or people that have the passion, have organization or groups that have that mission or that vision to do something, might just need that infrastructure support, right, or might just need that back end support that. I see this time and time again that business owners, one of their biggest challenges is bookkeeping, the numbers behind it all. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about how you're able to do that and through your organization and what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, a lot of organizations and businesses struggle with, because they have to be the jack of all trades. There's so many, when you're thinking about bookkeeping and taxes and federal and state laws and stuff like it. There's just so much to keep track of that it makes it really difficult, especially if you don't have access to or unaware of resources to help with that. I think it's interesting because recently, I think in the last, 5 years, decade, there's been a lot of push towards wellness, and how to make it, how to make work and more sustainable, more you were talking about livability for people that are working these days. And I think that's, I think there's a lot of performative things happening in that space, but it would be really wonderful if, as part of business resources that's states and governments and localities offer, have an aspect, a truly like meaningful aspect of wellness to businesses and organizations. I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of see different ways that we can use that vision to and implement to these organizations. Because right now, I think there's just so many challenges, and it's unfortunate because I feel like there's a decent amount of resources for businesses, but it's just not getting to the right people, right? Like the more resources you have, the more resources you get. Unfortunately, even though the need is much bigger on less resourced individuals and businesses. So I think that's a really good area to focus on and see how we can advocate for meaningful well-being, enhanced well-being among people who are working hard and struggling day to day.
Yeah, and you mentioned that sometimes the resources exist out there, or we know where they're at, but sometimes it just becomes so overwhelming. Sometimes there's an abundance of resources. We just don't know how to access them, right? And I know you're both kind of playing critical roles in helping be bridges, right, between traditional systems, traditional infrastructures, and individuals that are the ones implementing a lot of these solutions that we're talking about, a lot of the work that community really needs to address something as big as climate change, right? Something as big as addressing our environmental impacts, especially on the most historically impacted communities. All right. And I know we've talked about healthcare, but you have something to share?
Yeah, I just had something coming up as we were talking about this, which was, I think you had mentioned earlier, Jose, like, and we were talking about from the beginning, like a lot of people want to operate sustainably. I think a lot of people intrinsically value like kind of a green lifestyle, or what we call a green lifestyle. Like, we care about the environment, we care about the land, we care about each other. For a lot of people, I think, I really disagree with the narrative that's like people are inherently like we're destroying the planet. Like that's not really true. We're within systems that kind of destroy the planet, but I think most of us, if given like the option, would not operate in that way. And so I really want to highlight that when it comes to like running a sustainable business or something like that, I want to acknowledge that it is not easy. And in the way that things are set up right now, it's kind of a privileged thing to be able to run like a totally green business. Like sometimes it's more expensive, sometimes it's confusing, sometimes, like you said, Marie, like the resources are out there, but they're not always accessible. And like the bottom lines are so razor thin, whether you're a small business or a small nonprofit. I remember I started a nonprofit from scratch, which is how I learned a lot of things like on the ground when doing that several years ago. And I remember having all of these ambitions of like, I'm going to like benefit my communities in these ways. I'm always going to like buy local products. I'm always going to buy a sustainable product. I'm always going to do this and that. And then like come down to it. And I like look at my budget and I'm like, actually I have to go to Walmart, like if I'm going to get this done. And not because I wanted to, but because it was a choice between that or like not being able to do the work at all. And so I'm very hopeful. And I think I really am grateful and hope to learn from groups like Movement Strategy and the conversations that we're having. My hope would be that by making these things that are really technical and complicated and accessible, like getting access to healthcare, like, these compliance measures and things like that, when you alleviate that and make it easier and simpler for the businesses, then it makes it more realistic to be able to run our operations in ways that are more aligned with our values.
Yeah, and I know that has been one of the conversations I had with both of you. Like, how do we, particularly with like a small business or an independent contractor? I know government and nonprofits sometimes partner or work with independent contractors that know their communities best or really understand how to work with communities, but they might just not have that work at an institution or find themselves at a place where they can do this as a full-time work, right? So I know there's a lot of intent and a lot of opportunities out there for people working out there as independent contractors. But you mentioned it. If somebody leaves a traditional institution or a big corporate job, right, they lose that health insurance. They lose their accrued paid sick and safe time, right? They lose their retirement accounts. So I think that's what kind of started this our conversation to figure out, are there different models or examples or possibilities, like even if it's not possible, but thinking creatively. I know we've had conversations around co-ops. What could a co-op model be, or a shared resource model where these individuals or these independent contractors or small business, because an independent contractor is a small business owner, according to the IRS, the law, right? So that's where I really want to emphasize and support folks that are doing independent contract work to see themselves as small business owners, because there's a huge wealth of resources out there, information. It does get overwhelming. It does become, even for me, as as I'm growing my company, trying to, build my team, hire employees, figure out health insurance. That's been my biggest question. How do I offer health insurance for my employees, right? As a small business owner, as a small, and I know, Mary, you shared some more knowledge around how, and it depends on the state sometimes also, right? I know the state of California, right? You were sharing something about how they were able to structure a kind of a different system where small businesses could not directly provide benefits to their employees, but connect their employees to those resources. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, covered California, and I'm sorry, I should have looked up Seattle to see if you guys have similar programs, but it's insurance marketplace for businesses with under 100 employees. And so it provides affordable healthcare options for those employees. In the past, if you were a smaller business, insurance was incredibly expensive because it's not required if you're under a certain amount of employees. So they figured, okay, well, if they're offering employee insurance, it's probably because there are a bunch of sick people working there, which is, that shouldn't be the motivation for health insurance coverage, but unfortunately, that's how it worked over here. So California, as part of the healthcare ACA, implemented Cover California, which gives smaller businesses the option to get insurance. There's some requirements so that they can find insurance that's affordable, that they're not being charged excessive amounts because they're a smaller business. But it's still really expensive. No matter what, healthcare is really expensive, and it's a large part of business expenses that they have to work through. So I think there's also tax credits that I know that can apply if you do get healthcare if you're a small business, if you get healthcare, but I don't really know a lot about that. But the good news is I feel like we're coming to a space where we understand the importance of making things as basic as health insurance should be more widely available for smaller businesses and for individuals. I think we made a lot of progress. It's been a hard fought battle, apparently, if you watch the news, but we're making progress in that direction. But to kind of connect it to Movement Strategy Center, the way that we work as a fiscal sponsor, and we were talking about this and how we get applied outside, but our organizations are basically small businesses, and they work under Movement Strategies umbrella so that we are able to provide benefits. We're able to provide a 401k. Well, in this case, it's a 403b, and retirement benefits, healthcare, payroll, all of those things. And it's a lot, because the costs are shared. It's not as expensive as one business having a payroll department or HR department or a finance department. So it's a way to kind of spread out costs and still provide a lot more services for an organization that they might not be able to if they were on their own. And I know, Jose, you and I were talking about how could you structure a co-op model that could give those same kind of benefits to smaller businesses. They can benefit from a model like that. And yeah, again, like you said at the beginning, we don't have all the answers, but it's definitely a good thought. It's a good thought process to begin with, and see if we can, find some way to offer those services.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Em.
No, please.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, Mary and I were having a really good conversation about what could be possible and figuring out if it's say it's a collective of small business owners, right, coming together in an umbrella under like a corporate umbrella corporation, which we've heard in movies and the news, right? I'm like, what if we use those systems for ourselves, for our communities? The challenge there being, you really have to be mission aligned. All these different entities need to really be aligned and have a really good process of making those shared decisions under this umbrella entity, right? And sometimes that could be easier said than done, right? So we started exploring the concepts of a staffing agency, right? Mm-hmm. A traditional staffing agency is a company that you basically outsource your employees to. They basically provide staffing for specific projects, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it went into, what if the staffing agency was a co-op model where all these independent businesses owned a percentage of the umbrella staffing agency and made those collective decisions on being able to provide that shared infrastructure. And yeah, I think that could be very technical, and we can get into some really cool nuances there. But just using that as kind of a starting kind of creative idea. I know you and I talked about maybe what could be possible done here in the Pacific Northwest, right? Of doing something similar where it's more kind of bringing different communities together, different individuals together to create a shared model, to pull resources together to support each other in this work, especially if there is that mission alignment, especially if there is that kind of shared intention of being more sustainable as a business, as an individual, as a society. So I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of the things that are coming up for me are, backtracking a little bit about kind of what already exists. I just want to highlight that I really did not realize how robust Washington State's kind of public healthcare options are until I recently needed to use them. And I still don't, the hard thing about it is that it is still really confusing at the front end, but once you get into it, it's a very strong system. So I needed to use the parental leave policy recently, and in my household, we had a baby in December, and my Sustainable Seattle is not in a position, unfortunately, to be able to offer parental leave through the company, but we are really fortunate that the state of Washington has the Family Medical Leave Act. And Sustainable Seattle pays into it. I know that there are ways, if you are self-employed, that you can opt into it. I don't know what the accessibility of it is if you are not, like, if you don't have an employer who plays into it and you are not self-employed. I don't know if there are cases where folks fall through the cracks. That would be good to find out. But we were able to have so much financial support. And my partner works for a larger organization that also used FMLA. So, and he was able to get, a full 12 weeks off. I was able to get 5 months off. And it was all, I wasn't fully paid for that whole time, but I was paid enough that I was able to live without stress and fear. And a month after I had my baby, my cousin had a baby in Missouri that does not have a program like that. And she works for herself. She runs a small business. It's a well-established small business, but they're also not able to provide leave. And to just see what a different position she was in, I just want to mention that we have so much more work to do in our region and our communities. And I'm just so grateful for the people who came before us, who pushed hard to put things like FMLA into place. And you can use it it's not just for parental leave. I've known folks who have had very serious health symptoms due to stress in the workplace, who have been able to be referred and get a doctor's referral for FMLA and also get a full 12 weeks for that. So I think it's important to know that these resources are here for us and we can and should be using them. A couple other things that are coming up for me is that I love this idea of some kind of cooperative, some kind of collective. Part of how we came to this conversation was that the people who are part of Sustainable Seattle need it. And they were having the conversation with us and we were seeing that gap. And, like I said, Sustainable Seattle doesn't have parental leave. We don't yet have benefits ourselves. We don't have retirement. We are limited in the kind of PTO we can offer. We do try to offer it, but we have razor thin margins as well. We're a small organization. But our intention is that how can we use the fact that we have this organization, that we have Sustainable Seattle, that it does exist as an entity, and set these things up and then make them available to our community and the people who work with us. So we do offer fiscal sponsorship as well because of that. The mindset is kind of, well, we have a 501c3, we can get grants. If your work is aligned with us, you can use it. We will share it. We'll share the resource. And we would really like to be able to do that with these other benefits as well. But they're technically complicated to set up. It is confusing. And then I think the really important thing is to be able to do something like this with intention, to make sure that it is fair, to make sure that people have a say in it. And doing anything with intention requires like a lot of resources that often our communities just don't have. We don't have the time, we don't have the money to participate in something like that. And that's one of the big roadblocks we've run into is we've been talking about implementing something like this for years, but we have a very hard time just like getting the people together who are like, we do want this, we're interested in it, but like, how do we figure these things out? That's been like a big challenge for us to be able to help to move to the next phase. And like some of it is like, we know that a co-op is also a legal structure as a nonprofit. Like, are we talking about a co-op as like building a co-op, or are we talking about co-op as like, we're all going to agree to cooperate? And like, it's not like a formal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we need to be using the word collective instead of co-op because there's also legal implications in terms of what direction we go. And that gets fuzzy as well. It's all kind of unclear.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something really key also, access, or how do you enter a system like that? Even if there was a co-op was established, a system was set up, how do you interact with it? How do you sign up? Like myself, I think you're right. The state of Washington does offer really robust healthcare. And the more I'm learning about, the more I also I'm appreciating the good work that people have done before us, right, to get to where we're at. But at the same time, there's still gaps. There's still challenges that certain populations, like myself as a DACA recipient, I wasn't eligible, or I'm still not eligible to access the state exchange system because of my immigration status. That's changing though, so that's exciting. I think starting next year,
Wow.
undocumented immigrants are going to be able to access the state exchange. So that's really exciting. Hopefully, I can bring some more information to our community about that because I know that's been a big need, especially for our undocumented immigrant community. That even beyond what the issues, the challenges that we're talking about, there's also a huge gap also, or huge barriers that are put in place because of how our legal system is built and learning how to navigate these legal systems as well, right? Whether it's as a nonprofit, as a business, as an individual. So yeah, I think out of this, a lot of conversations can branch out and we can dive, into so many different topics. But bringing it back to sustainability and sustainable ecosystem. I also wanted to talk about, from the perspectives of small business, you two kind of being at the intersection of environmental and nonprofit and the work that you're all doing, and me coming from the business perspective. I was hoping you two can share some insights or guidance to a small business owner. How can we be more sustainable? How can we use different techniques, different resources, different tools to learn how to be more sustainable as a small business, or how to build sustainable businesses within that lens?
Yeah, I think as a small business, I hate to bring it back to resources, but a lot of times in the communities have a lot of there's resources there. There's grants for small businesses. There's grants for micro businesses. I think, but there's also, like you mentioned, access issues to that information. I have a friend who is here from Argentina, and I've been kind of helping him navigate the health insurance system and different like housing. And I think it's hard because he's coming from a place that it's just radically different, right? Their healthcare is radically different from here. It didn't make any sense to him. Some of the things that we do here, the way our system works. So I think it really comes down to being able to access those resources in your community. And, I think, yeah, being able to access the resources in your community to help with those, to help gain access to different resources. I feel like I'm saying the same word over and over again, resources, but basically, I feel like there's a lot of information out there, but it's hard to get. Just like how Em was explaining how in the beginning to get, her parental leave was difficult. And then once you got over that barrier, it started to fall into place and it made sense. And it was so much better. Your well-being was so much better because you had these resources at hand. I don't know. I just wish there was a way that we can match resources to the people that need them in a way that's not so bureaucratic. And that would be, that could get down to the people that need them the most. I think, it's not enough just to translate it into a different language. It's really getting into those communities and letting them know about the resources that are available to them.
Yeah, that's the dream, right? How do we make sure all the people that really need it get access to the resources
Mhm.
that we know are there or not? Sometimes they are not. Sometimes there
Yeah.
are still gaps.
Yeah, I totally agree. And some of what comes up for me, a few things. One, a lot of small, and I want to kind of backtrack on something I said before about how sometimes it's a privilege to be like a green business or a sustainable business. I don't want to be discouraging because, first of all, a lot of businesses are sustainable already, especially small businesses. Um, I've heard the point made before that like caregiving industry, like people who do caretaking, that is an inherently sustainable business. It's a very low resource use. If you are like anything from like a home healthcare aide to like working in hospitals and things like that is a very sustainable. If you do like childcare, if you're a teacher, these are low, you got low carbon impact there, you have low environmental impact. You know, even if you're doing things like using construction paper and things like that, in the grand scheme of things, that's a really small carbon impact. And there's always things that people can do to get really creative if you really want to like reuse materials and recycle and upcycle and stuff. I mean, how many of us did that, you know, in school when we were kids and things? So a lot of industries that people are in are already pretty low carbon. And in the state of Washington and in Seattle especially, there are a ton of incentives, like Marie, you were mentioning, to be more sustainable in your business. So I know that Seattle Public Utilities does a lot of grants for people who, if you have a small business that uses a lot of materials or supplies, there are grants to help you cover the cost or develop operations and practices to be more sustainable with your materials that you're using. The Washington State Department of Ecology has grants around that. There's a really exciting new program called Next Cycle that gives grants, and they'll do seed grants that are their goal is for them to be as easy to get as possible. And they're about $10,000 to just get you in the door. That can lead to bigger grants down the line. And you can be a small business, you can be a nonprofit. And I want to mention that if you're a restaurant, there's a really strong movement in Seattle to help reduce food waste and to help you get more access to locally grown food and food that matches if you have like a specific type of cuisine or need specific ingredients. If it's like culturally specific food, there often are local farms that are growing that food. And there's a whole movement around localized composting or what are called digesters, anaerobic digesters or digesters that essentially are machines that you put food waste into, and then they create this like extremely nutrient dense fertilizer. For some reason, you're not supposed to call it a fertilizer, but come on, it's a fertilizer. I don't know why you're not supposed to call it a fertilizer. That you can then use, you know, you can send out to farms or even local community gardens. And this stuff increases the yield of edible foods by 60%, both the size of your food and the number of foods. So if you got like a squash vine, you're going to get 60% more squash, and those squash are going to be 60% bigger. And then you could then pick those and use them in your dish. So there's a lot of really great super local resources that folks can use, you know, across a range of industries to be more sustainable or to continue being sustainable.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, there's also kind of the movement towards fresh produce, growing local, supporting local, right? We can talk about food deserts, right? And how there's been this movement to build more local produce, more local farming operations in these food deserts, like the community South Park, right? We've been historically one of the biggest. I mean, you can add so many layers what South Park has gone through, but when Marra Farm started there, and the Salsa de la Vida, a local co-op of women who came together to learn how to operate a farm as a business entity to, again, be able to create more of these opportunities to have more access. There's so many opportunities for businesses to think creatively, right? To build in sustainable practices that maybe might not cost so much, and actually quite the opposite. It might save them some money. So that's really exciting, that especially in a place, the Pacific Northwest, and I'm sure in the Bay Area, right, we have a lot of similarities where communities are pushing for this or are building not sometimes non-traditional systems, whether it's a community farm, a community pea patch garden, right? So that's really exciting to hear that there is this movement going on. Because if you also look at the higher up the chain of businesses, there's a huge opportunity for small mom and pop farming operations that are kind of quote traditional farms. Recently, I was working on a project where we're working with some local farms in Eastern Washington, and their biggest challenge has been that they depend solely on one or two main packing distributors, because the big institution is the one that controls their pricing, controls their product, controls when their product is purchased, where it's distributed. Um, they would love to sell locally. They would love to sell to restaurants like this. The challenge is geographic connection between these different businesses. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to really have these conversations with our community and highlight these opportunities, highlight these new channels that we can uh, implement these sustainable approaches to how we do business, right? Um, yeah, I'm curious, Mary. Do you know of any cool projects or ways that businesses are adapting or implementing sustainable approaches to down in the Bay Area?
Yeah, one of our projects is called Heal Food Alliance. Does a lot of work for sustainable food and food justice. They do amazing work, and they have so many programs, and they're actually a very successful organization. Um, I think if I think I think we're starting to get more organizations that are focused on food and food justice, but it's a tough slog. It's a lot of there's so many barriers to you know even just getting food in certain neighborhoods. It's so difficult, and I think uh, there's a lot of pushback, I think, because it's such a big industry, but I think they're doing amazing work in the Bay Area towards food justice.
Very cool. I can't wait to learn more about their work too. Um, and yeah, kind of closing out this conversation, I wanted to maybe leave it off. If there's any other important things you want to mention, if not, maybe leave you with this question, or maybe with a request. If you could share some words of inspiration, or share um, some thoughts around how we as a community, we as a society, uh, can think differently to build these ecosystems of support, right? Through I know we went through a couple of different rabbit holes in our conversation today, right? But really kind of coming back as individuals that where we live in this world, and we're seeing what's happening in the East Coast right now, right? With all the smokes, we saw what happened here last year, and we can spend all day talking about the environmental impacts, but really centering ourselves in that sustainable ecosystem, trying to build a healthier environment, not just for ourselves, but for our families and for future generations. Whether it's through small businesses, through nonprofits, through traditional systems. Any words of encouragement that we can leave out there to our listeners to dream big, to think creatively about how to do this work?
I was listening the other day to a podcast about how in Western culture it's very individualized, but in cultures in other areas, it's not like that. In other parts of the world, it's a lot more communal cultures, and I think it's important, as a child of immigrants as well, to kind of not forget about the kind of culture that the more community-based culture that we came from, and instead of trying to change ourselves to become more like Western American type culture, to try and build off of our native cultures and bring them forth in like the work that we do. I think it's really important to kind of stop trying to incorporate things that are like, I feel like, against our ancestral nature, the way that our parents were grown or were raised, and trying to, instead and trying to go for the rat race here. I think it's really important to kind of reconnect with the cultures that we came from, and think about that, and be intentional in moving forward with the work that we do.
For sure, absolutely. How about you, Em?
Could not agree more. You're making me think about there's a Coast Salish creation story that goes Together We Lift the Sky. It's called the Yaha story, Together We Lift the Sky. And we think about that all the time, that, like we talked about at the very beginning, like these lessons are not we don't need to figure it out. We need to return to the lessons that we already know. And I think like you said, Marie, like be very cautious of not falling into the rat race, all the pressures that push us into the rat race, and trust the like knowledge that we come from. And I guess the invitation and the encouragement that I would give to people is to also, I think the other thing that our culture does is it's highly individualistic, and it really punishes people for not being ahead of the curve. So I think sometimes it's like it's very risky to be like, I want to collaborate, I want to ask for help, I want to offer support. Like, I think our culture undermines that a lot, and our society undermines collaboration a lot. And being able to build trust with each other, to reach out for support, to offer support, to say, this is what I need. And to try to build these things together, I think is pivotal. So that's why I'm so grateful for this conversation. I'm grateful for the ways that we've been sharing ideas, saying, we're thinking about the same things in this parallel space. And how do we not be parallel? How do we find ways to share the information that we know back and forth with each other, and to build each other so that we can all be stronger together, so that together we can lift the sky.
Absolutely. That together, I think that's the key word for today, right? And kind of what Marie was saying, that ancestral knowledge, how do we bring that back to the work we're doing today in the society? It reminds me of a word from my grandma's town, tequio. It's the meaning of coming together as a community to do something big, whether it's to build a new house for a new family, or put together a celebration for a quinceañera or a birthday or a baptism. That word is really has been in my family for generations, and it's something that I want to apply through my work through Growing Contigo and what we're doing. And I'm so grateful that now you two are part of our community here at Growing Contigo. We can continue this dialogue, both in private, but also maybe having future conversations here at the podcast. So I'm really grateful for you two. But just wanted to one last time, if there's any last remaining words. If not, we can wrap up today's show. And yeah, thanks. I don't think there was any comments on the Facebook Live or YouTube Live, but if you are all listening afterwards in the recording, feel free to email us. We'll be sharing some contact information afterwards, or you can reach us through our websites. And definitely, we want to keep this conversation flowing, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again for the invite. And yeah, if anyone out there has any questions or wants to reach out, feel free. All about collaboration together, right? So thank you. It's great meeting you guys also.
Yeah, oops, sorry. Just like a table flipped on accident.
So excited.
Yeah, too excited. Yeah, just grateful so much for the conversation. Thank you, Jose, for bringing us together.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And thanks everybody for listening today. We hope this was a fruitful conversation, and it planted a few seeds out there to start exploring. Sometimes we can get too technical into seeing how do systems work, but like you both said, together, I think together we can figure this out, right? Figure out how to be a healthy, sustainable society, whether it's as a business owner, whether it's working in nonprofits, whether it's as a worker. So definitely, I want to make sure we all continue the conversation going with our families, with our friends, with our colleagues, and open it up to you all. So thank you all for listening. Really appreciate you following, and stay tuned for more shows in the future. We'll be bringing some more really cool conversations, some good information, good education for small business owners, for community members. If you want to learn how to start your own business, we definitely will be bringing a workshop around that, on what are the steps to start your business or start an LLC here in Seattle, in the state of Washington, and maybe later in future states like California. So stay tuned for more of that. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.